So I bought a couple of identical 1500 watt e-bike controllers. This was for running the hacky and just generally needed some. And picked one of them up and I could hear rattling. So I thought, better open my case, see what it was. And what it was one of these capacitors. It's electrolytic and it was on one of the rails near the wires. So I've replaced that because the legs are broken, but just looking at the various capacitors, we're really just held on by the legs, and which with an event like Hacky Race where you're bouncing about, that's not good. Ultimately it's potentially a failure mode where the large capacitors, as you can see here, could break off because we're only really held on by pretty thin legs. So what I've done is I've gone out and bought some neutral silicone. Neutral silicone is important so that a lot of the silicones they aren't neutral, and that can have a reaction with the PCB or the components. So I bought some, and the intention is for major large components like those electrolytics that you can see, is to use that to basically stick them to the board. You could use heat glue, which is sort of okay, but of course a lot of this is heat sink for the components. It gets warm, and the last thing you want is your heat running, making the glue viscous again, so that it just gloops everywhere and doesn't do its job of holding the components. So bought some of this. This was about £7, and the next step will be to stick down all those electrolytics and anything else I fancy with it, then recase those back up. So I'll show you what that looks like once I've stuck them all down. Well, it took a little bit more effort than I thought in terms of getting the silicone out, because in the cartridge itself it had gone solid, so I had to poke and weed all that out. So this is what it sort of looks like with the silicone in there. Not necessarily the most artistic approach, and I know that some people might say, well, that could affect the cooling of the components themselves. Not so worried about that. More, I just don't want them to fall off while I'm racing, and it really is just a case of getting the nozzle in, giving it a squidge, and that's it. Avoiding these areas, those are the current shunts, those 3 wires, don't really want to gum those up, mainly because obviously that's a control area for the hacky, or the speed control in this case I should say, but also it's an area where at times you might want to tinker by changing resistance of those to change the power rating. Next step is to then do the other one. You can see the other one, there's no silicone on at the moment, and you see these big capacitors can just wiggle around. They're not attached by anything other than their legs, so stick those down with silicone and reassemble everything.